I'm Adam Walker, a biometrics consultant, and this is the Pharma Prescribed Podcast, where leaders, innovators, and hidden voices in healthcare open up. No soundbites, no spin, just raw insight, one prescription at a time. In an industry driven by data, protocols, and pressure, we rarely pause to ask the human questions. What drives us? What breaks us? And what truths live behind the titles we wear? Natalie Douglas is a transformative leader whose influence spans global pharma, biotech, and health tech. With over 20 years of board-level experience, Natalie has held various CEO roles, including at Healthcare at Home, and led strategic growth at Idis, which is now Cgen. At Healthcare at Home, she oversaw one of Europe's largest providers of complex clinical services outside the hospital setting, delivering care to over 150,000 patients annually, and redefining how treatment reaches people where they live. Her accolades include the Pharma Voice Top 100, Health Investor Power Top 50, Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, and Sunday Times Fast Track. Whether mentoring founders, entrepreneurs, and new entrants to the industry, or investing in scalable platforms, Natalie brings clarity to complexity and a social conscience to strategy. I'm honored to call Natalie a mentor and a friend. Natalie, welcome to Pharma Prescribed.
Adam, thank you for that amazing introduction. That reflects how many years I've been in this industry.
And maybe how many years we've known one another, dare I say.
I know, it's a very long time. That's one of the advantages, I think, of spending your entire career in one industry. You get to know some amazing people and you get to stay in touch with those people too.
I definitely was a young man when we first came into contact with one another. I don't feel quite so young these days. And dare I say it, I do recall very vividly some of the interactions we had then. So for our audience and those out there who aren't familiar with you, could you just give us a little bit of a potted history outside of, what I've touched upon?
Yeah, my goodness, a few decades to cover, but essentially I started my career carrying the bag, selling drugs to doctors for Janssen Pharmaceuticals. That was my first entry really into this amazing industry. And I guess where you and I connected was a few years into my tenure in building the global market leader in managed access programs. And in fact, instigating that entire model of enabling patients to gain access to therapies that weren't yet registered where they were. And, I look back now and see where the industry is today. I've seen huge change and, a lot of still remaining opportunity. But, the point is I spent my career really focused on providing solutions to patients with unmet need. And Idis was a main passion project for me that lasted almost 15 years. And when we first connected there, which was actually back in about 2011, 2012, you and I were talking then about data, analytics, real world evidence, real world data in that setting outside of clinical trials. That was, a long time ago now. When I look at where we are today, that's still a relevant topic and maybe a topic that's moved on a little bit more since then, but perhaps hasn't moved on quite as quickly as I would have expected. So, we were real pioneers, I think, back then, in thinking differently about how patients access therapies and how drug companies find access routes outside of a classic trial or outside of a setting where the drug has already been approved.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful reflection. You're right. Real world evidence isn't just a buzzword for today. We were definitely there at the forefront. I'm not sure how that's moved forward significantly, other than to say that people are still talking about it. It's still extremely relevant. It's probably more relevant today than it's ever been. And without even referencing the pandemic, which is clearly pivotal to that, there have been other significant milestones along the way in real world evidence and expanding the access to drugs.
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, we re-engaged again, didn't we, at the beginning of the pandemic, which is when I started Rarity, but then became Reality, which again was centered around collation of data points, that were all data driven from patients' direct experience with therapy. And it was still really early days to be talking about that. So that's my other sort of time stamp, if you like, when we talk about real world evidence generation in this particular setting. 5 years ago, it was still something that I think pharmaceutical companies were quite uncomfortable about or just not ready to face.
And today?
It's a great question, because this is something I'm spending a lot of time on at the moment. What does it look like today? Where is it going to go in the next 5 years? I definitely think that it's more on the agenda today for various reasons. And I think that's a really good thing. And I still think there's opportunity that needs to be uncovered there. But I think it's a good thing, but it just shows how long it's taken to get here. I would say we'll have to catch up again, hopefully in less than 5 years, and then we can talk about what's happened since this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. You talked about how you first got into the industry and how that subsequently went forward. You are someone who, I think, if anyone knows you personally, but certainly if they know you professionally, you've had an extraordinary career, and you are having an extraordinary career, Natalie. And as I mentioned in my introduction, as someone who connects with you very regularly and really does value your opinion, what drives you? What drives you every single day? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What continues to drive you? Because your motivation never seems to go.
I laugh about that. Sometimes I don't know the direct answer to that question. I'm just this ball of energy, to be honest. And that's sort of mentally and physically, not to the point where I have to sort of climb mountains and do all of those crazy things, but I need my brain to be stimulated. And I have a busy brain. So I have a neurodiversity. I have a busy brain, and that leads to quite a lot of fidgeting as well. But the two combined, I think, are very powerful instruments and lead to tremendous creativity. It's one of the things I think that made me realize there was a market opportunity with Idis that actually at the time other people didn't get or felt was, in some cases thought it might be potentially illegal, which is quite funny when you look back on it. But I think for me, I've just got a natural curiosity. I love people. So I guess starting my career in sales perhaps felt like or looked like the kind of route that I might take. I love people. So engaging with other people, asking a lot of questions. My curiosity is often centered around somehow identifying a problem and trying to, by asking questions, figure out how deep or how broad that problem might be. So I'm naturally curious. I've got a lot of energy. My brain needs to be actively engaged. Otherwise, I guess my husband might say I might get myself into trouble. But in general, I feel like I'm a natural learner. I like to learn things. I don't assume that I know everything, but somehow my brain hooks onto things that other people perhaps aren't thinking about or perhaps don't see as being interesting. I'm a very positive person in the main too. So, I often, I am a bounce out of bed kind of person. I've always been that way. I've had challenges along the way, as most of us do, where perhaps we've been impacted. That enthusiasm is impacted by extraneous factors. But I'm naturally curious, naturally positive. I love being around other people, and I'm an explorer. That's the bottom line. I love to explore, and the pharma industry, the healthcare industry is such a fascinating environment. It's challenging, it's complicated, it's vast. I guess that's why I've ended up in healthcare, because there's so many issues to tackle that it does keep my brain occupied for quite a long time. And that's where I've met an awful lot of people from all different walks of life within that community. Is a big community, but I've met a lot of like-minded people within that community with different skills. That's the other thing to say. But yeah, I'm just a very positive person, naturally curious, and I'm an explorer. I like to make progress. I don't like to stand still.
I would concur with that. Yes, definitely. That's my experience of having spent time with you as well, Natalie. I would say, yeah, you definitely emit energy, And as someone who I've really always looked up to, I'm curious, did you have any mentors along the way that supported you in your journey, in your earlier journey? Because there has been a very visible transition through your roles and industry, but I'm just wondering how far back that goes, where key people influenced your earlier journey.
I think from a very early age, probably my family environment. You know, I come from a family of actually sole traders, really, not so much entrepreneurs. Me going to a big company like a J&J company like Janssen was quite a big deal because I didn't come from that. You know, most of the people in my vicinity and my family were, managing small businesses. But the point is they were very independent thinkers and wanted to do things on their own. I've definitely got those traits. When I did land at Janssen at J&J, that was a massive revelation for me because, as I say, I wasn't used to that environment. And actually, some of that was a little intimidating when I think back. I still don't know how I ended up getting a job, although I do remember who employs me and who could see my potential, I guess. And I guess to specifically answer your question, in those early days, I don't know if they were mentors per se, but I was hired by a woman. My boss was a woman, Sue Webb at Janssen. And there were two senior women in the company at that time. One was Jane Griffiths and the other was Liz Norton. And actually, they all mentored me at one stage or another. But I guess what was obvious to me, or what stood out to me, is that there were women in leadership roles. And that gave me confidence at that time. And their leadership style perhaps helped me lower the intimidation that I felt. Also, my trainer, Sadie, Hartley, another woman, she was a real influence actually during my training at Janssen, because I was the only person on my training course without a biochemistry degree. And, my degree is in marketing. So I was sort of feeling even more intimidated at that point. And I had a lot of encouragement that I could achieve some of the expectations that were set. There's a lot of scientific testing, and some of it to me was super new, but they encouraged me and made me believe it in myself. And so it was pivotal for me being in that company. And actually what Sadie pointed out to me, I remember during my training course, I've said this before in another podcast that I was talking about, when you're training to be a drug rep, part of the training is to go out and pitch to real doctors. And I remember on that day, and she could see I looked like I was going to be sick. I thought the whole thing was horrific. What am I doing here? And she pointed it out to me before I went. And she just said to me, just remember, you don't have to be like everybody else. You can be who you are because you've got skills, frankly, that other people don't have. And so that really helped me. It stopped me being sick, obviously, on the day. But actually, what was really interesting is I got exactly that kind of feedback from those doctors. I got very positive feedback. And the feedback from most of us, she was great to spend some time with. She wasn't like the typical rep. She did things differently. And the other thing, she asked a lot of questions. And, that's often my strategy because I never go into anything assuming I know everything. So, yeah, I guess they would be my early mentors. It depends. I think mentoring is an interesting concept because there are so many different styles of mentorship, aren't there? But I guess those would be my early mentors. I definitely looked up to all of them because they were women in senior positions, and all of them encouraged me individually to actually first and foremost believe in myself.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting observation. Obviously, for you as a woman in business, a significant woman these days in business, having people in those positions of authority 20 plus years ago must have been quite powerful. I do also recall first coming into clinical research and recognizing how many more women there were in positions of authority than I expected, actually. I think I may have had a preconceived idea that there were mainly men, but it seemed then, and seems even more so, to be balanced as an industry, fairly well balanced. And I think that's only continued in that particular vein. Many of my best managers and people that I've reported to have also been women. I personally find it a lot easier to get on with women than I do with men. I don't know why that is. They're softer, they're more compassionate, they're more empathetic than most fairly strong, sharp, elbowed men can be. And those are the types of people that I tend to identify with as well. So that does resonate quite loudly. Yeah, it's a fascinating insight you provide there. But also, I think now you are one of those voices of the industry. You are a woman in significant positions of authority where you've had that opportunity to influence. And how has that played out for you in those positions of influence?
Well, the other thing I'm going to say to start with is that women are more honest with their feedback as well. It's a really different trait it's a distinctive trait, actually, in my experience in working with men and with women. And by the way, I mentor more men than I mentor women, actually, and I love doing that. And I love working with men and always have. I certainly think when you are working closely with other people, it's great to have a mix as well. But as a woman, as a leader, as a business leader, as a female CEO, I was often the only woman in the room, particularly, in bringing private equity into Idis as I did. I was the only woman around the boardroom table. And up until very recently, again, probably the only woman in the boardroom, one of the only women CEOs who built a business to the size and scale that Idis became. In those days, that was very, very unusual. One of the only women, or one of the first women, certainly in the pharma services space, to secure private equity backing for a business that was already proven. I could go to market, I could go and talk to investors about a business that was already profitable and that I'd been leading. I think if I was going out in those days and the business was smaller and less profitable, I don't think I would have been taken as seriously at all. And so how does it work out for me? I'm a major advocate of mentoring and coaching men and women who are coming up through the ranks. I chair 2 med device, med tech companies today. Both are run by first-time CEOs. One is female, the other is male. Similar challenges, similar traits. There are definitely differences between the male and the female in some respects, but in terms of, what I'm working on them with, I think I'm very interested in helping them, and I adapt to support them and help them and enable them. That's my job. And often many times particularly men have reached out to me on LinkedIn asking for mentorship. And if ever somebody asks me to do that, even if I don't know who they are, I've never met them, I will always respond to them. That is just the way I am. Because to me, it takes a lot of courage to reach out and ask somebody for help. In my early days, I guess that's one thing I would have done more of. But I'm always very willing to support people who are looking for support and people who need it. Particularly those today who are going up through the ranks and trying to build a business or trying to internationalize a company. If I've got skills that I think are relevant to them, then, and there's a good chemistry, because I think that's important too. I feel that my strengths as a mentor myself are good and relevant. There's definitely times when it's not a dynamic that's going to work. So I think I've got a responsibility to lead in whatever role I play today, whether I'm in a non-exec capacity, which is pretty typical at the moment, or whether I'm an advisor. I feel like I don't like the term, it's my time to give back. I don't like that at all. It's not a give back situation. It's a skill set that needs to be used. And I'm a sounding board that can be provided to help other people. So that's how I look at it. And it's rewarding for me as well. I genuinely wouldn't do it just for charitable reasons. I find it really rewarding if, there's a really positive result for that person as a result of some advice or counsel I've given.
Thank you for explaining that and giving a bit more color to the question. I think I wasn't really going down the route of, it wasn't the gender question. That wasn't necessarily, it was more around characteristics. And I'm just curious
Yeah.
around, the kind of characteristics you think lend themselves to good leadership. What is it that you pride yourself on, that you look for and encourage in those that you are guiding? What do you think are
I
the best
think
characteristics?
that's such a good question. I'm sorry I didn't answer your question properly. It just, things just spring to mind, and you just, how you respond to somebody's question, you can't always guarantee how it's going to turn out. I think that's a really interesting question. And I think the answer to which has to start with, it really depends. But there are some fundamental factors to me that are really important in leadership. And, one of those is honesty, conveying honesty and being genuine. I believe I was always that person. Some people can't take it, right? Some people can't take the honesty, but that to me is fundamental in leadership. Being willing to listen. I think this can be a real flaw when you're leading a business for the first time, or if you haven't got a lot of support. You feel like you have to do everything, or you have to know all the answers. Not that you do, but that you have to be seen to know all the answers. And, that's good leadership to me, is about asking those questions if you don't know. And that's all part of the authenticity, the honesty, being human, I think, is what's really critical. Sense of humour. It gets really tough sometimes in leadership, doesn't it? I mean, I led a major turnaround at Healthcare at Home. I think everybody knows that. That was a really, really fraught and emotional situation. And, you've got to walk into that situation providing courage, confidence, and calm to people. So, I think your leadership skill, you have to be highly empathetic, I think, and have a high level of EQ, because it's the human factors. You started this podcast talking about the human factors. It's the human elements that make leadership so powerful, either positively or negatively. Being seen to be someone who can be calm and confident in a storm, and also bring you along the journey. Sometimes you leave people behind, and that's not always great leadership. And sometimes you have to leave them behind because it's the best thing for the business. I'm not sure I'm answering your question again. I'm going to stop talking and you can tell me, redirect me or otherwise.
I think in a roundabout way, you've answered it very succinctly. Communication is pivotal. Clearly, communication is pivotal. And you made reference earlier to some of the skills that differentiated you from the other bioscientists in the room with your marketing background. I think there is a complementarity. I'll put my teeth back in. I think there is a complementarity to the skill set that you had then that has continued in all that you do. But I think you don't have to be the smartest person in the room and know all the facts. As long as you're aware of where those answers are, you can put your hand to it, or the person in the room that does have those answers, you're good. It really doesn't matter. That's my experience as well, in that I never expect to be the smartest person in the room. There are far more highly qualified masters and PhDs in the room. And as long as you know where to go for those answers and you can get your hands on them and these people engage with you, more importantly, it's all good. But those characteristics, I think ultimately it comes back to communication, doesn't it? It's always about communication. It's about the human contact.
It absolutely is. You're right. I think the other thing to say, what I've learned being more non-exec in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, is that you can still lead, but you're leading from the back rather than the front. So I've actually learned a lot about leadership being in that role. And I compare it to what it's like leading the business. So, I can see what it's like being in that CEO seat, which is what I think helps me be an effective non-exec or chair. But there are times when in that role, and it's actually quite a comforting role sometimes to be in, where you don't have to be the loudest voice. I'm not saying you always have to be anyway, but you don't have to be at the front necessarily. Some of the skills I've learned is about how to lead more quietly, And it goes back to my asking questions scenario. And I'm quite comfortable actually in that situation quite often, just asking questions. And sometimes the answer comes because you've asked that question. You know, that person answers the question and the penny drops for them. And so to me, my style of leadership has actually evolved a lot. And it's quite a nice way to feel like you're still building your leadership skills and you're using your leadership skills. It's been quite an interesting experience. I won't say transition, but it's been an interesting experience for me.
I appreciate you clarifying that around that particular point. Skills come in different shapes and sizes, and there is no one size fits all, is there? The non-exec role sounds really interesting, and it's something that I often see in and around LinkedIn, and I see referenced in people's biographies. How did you get into that in the first place? Were you approached, or did you actively go seeking those?
My very first couple of non-exec roles came when I was still at Idis. So the first one for me was with a non-profit called Global Genes. I was very engaged in the rare disease community, and I was approached by somebody who was very involved in that organization and asked to join the board. So that was a role that lasted for almost 8 years, where I became the vice chair. And that was a really informative number of years, actually, and gave me good insight into, again, some leadership from the back. But I've been approached every time I've actually been approached. I haven't gone out seeking. The next one was a small female health company based in San Diego. Again, I was approached through some bankers I knew. And latterly, the two med device companies I chair, I was approached by the British Growth Fund about those particular opportunities. So I've always been approached with very specific goals in mind. So yeah, that's how it's happened, really. Yeah. I can't think of a single situation where I have gone out looking.
Clearly your reputation precedes you, and whatever you're doing great in that particular area. On a personal note, I know you travel all around the world and you have homes all over the place. Whenever I speak to you, you might be in Switzerland one day, you might be in the US another day, you might be in London another. How do you coordinate that around life, personal, family? Is that challenging?
It's a great question. I mean, that's part of my sort of curiosity, exploration, personality. I do like a bit of variety. It has to be said, right? I do get a little bit, I can't sit still for too long. I like to have different things going on, and that's been constant in my life. I would say, though, in the last few years, I've been more non-exec, largely because my son, I've got one amazing son who he's going into his final year in senior school, high school. The last few years have been really important for me to spend more time with him. It's been a fantastic part of my growth journey as well, spending more time with a teenager. And I've wanted to spend more time at home as well, which has been amazing. So most of the time I'm where he is, but some of my non-exec work takes me to London regularly, where, you know, I chair a couple of British businesses. Also, it gives me a chance to see my family, my parents, and my brother down in Dorset, and to catch up with my friends. So London for me is still a sort of business hub, but it's also a big part of my life being in the UK because my family and friends are there. So it's always going to be my second home. And, you know, buzzing between Switzerland and the US it's just happened to be that way for the past sort of 10 years of my life. But the more I spend time in Switzerland, the more I love it as well. Maybe it's an age thing, I don't know. But yeah, it's just been part of who I've been, and I think it's part of who we are as a family. We're an international unit at this point. So yeah, it's just I can't say anything other than that. I just enjoy it and I'm used to it.
Whatever you're
Nothing
doing,
more.
it's clearly working, isn't it? It's giving you that global
Yeah.
spread, both physically and virtually, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
I'm attached to each place. That's the point. There's an attachment. There's something, you know, there's a hold in each place, which makes it even more interesting. I don't need to travel for travel's sake. I used to travel a lot with my CEO roles. I definitely wouldn't want to go back to that weekly commute like I did for so long. So there's a hook in every place for me, which makes it feel like home whenever I'm there. But I like the variety of different cultures and different experiences.
I should say we did share a very nice lunch not so long ago, and I should thank you for that. I should thank you for that. You've given us an amazing insight into your background and everything that you're doing currently, Natalie. I always like to round up with a quick fire round, and I just wonder what is the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
I think the one piece of advice I would give to my younger self, particularly in a professional capacity, but maybe also in a personal capacity, is to find those mentors. Look for people that can really support you and help you along the way. I definitely think that's the one thing I think would have made a difference in a couple of situations for me. Yeah, that's it really. Find the mentors. I didn't necessarily understand the need to look for help. Or maybe help is the wrong word, but to look for support, look for mentorship, look for coaching. That came later in my career. Of course, it's invaluable, but I could have done with it probably 10 years earlier than I sought it out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that point. The 3 top qualities you value most when building a team. I think you've already made mention to a couple of those, but
oh my God, honesty and trust. I mean, trust is a very big thing for me. It's an underlined in red capital letters word. It's everything about my professional and personal being. It's so vital. So trust and honesty to me are combined. Commitment, for sure, looking for people that really commit, really, are passionate, but commitment, trust, honesty. And the other is the ability to keep up. It's the pace. I mean, I love working with people that move fast and that's not to break things. I'm not a fan of that, but I move quickly and I love working with people that can move at the same pace. And I just, so those are the fundamentals to me. It's a bit frustrating if those 3 straightforward things are not all combined in one package.
I think we share that mutual high energy. Thank you.
I know. That's why we're really good friends, Adam.
And what is your favorite thing outside of work?
Hanging out with my husband and my son. When we're in the US, we watch basketball. Basketball's a big thing for us. And just hanging out, really. We love cooking together as a family. And I have to have a lot of friends and a lot of interests, like art, interior design, just hanging out, socializing. It all sounds very boring, but all of those things that you do with other people. I love hanging out with my friends, and I love a bit of art and a little bit of community. I'm learning Italian, and I'm learning Italian as well. What else do I do? I'm busy. I'm busy. I like to be engaged and occupied.
And finally, your number one goal for life and for business.
I just want to do something amazing. And I think a lot of what came with Idis was amazing, building a global brand, creating a whole new market. That was, I don't know if it was a professional goal, but achieving that and seeing how that market has evolved has been amazing for me to feel that I have already achieved a lot. But really, it's about feeling useful and being engaged to make change positive I'm trying to avoid the term making a difference, but I can't. That's really what I'm all about. I like to make a difference, and I need that. I need that in my personal and professional relationships.
Natalie, to concur, you do make a difference. I really appreciate you taking the time today, your honesty, your openness and humility, and sharing your truth. It's a delight. As I started, I'll finish with, it's a delight to know you as a friend, as a colleague and a mentor. And I can't thank you enough for being on Pharma Prescribed today. Thank you, Natalie.